moving on with our program, I'd like to welcome my friend and colleague, Wayne Robinson. Wayne is the Assistant VP with FM Global and the past chair of the Financial and Insurance Conference Planners Association. Other than that, he's my friend. Wayne, thank you so much for being here. And we heard some things from Jonathan and Terry's session, with legal responsibility contracts that really feeds into insurance in a way, huh? Insurance. And so I just, before you get started, do you have any thoughts on what they commented on? I know John will chime in when he feels like it, because that's what he does. But do you have any thoughts on what they covered before we move on?
Well, nothing specifically, Diane. And again, thank you for asking me or inviting me to be involved. I want to also thank you for, in the beginning of this podcast, to illustrate or share light or bring light to exactly what's going on socially right now. And I think it's ever so important in the memory of this gentleman, George Floyd, who lost his life senselessly. And I think it's good for us all to take a step back and take a look at what we're doing, what we can do to influence social change. I think it's so important at a time like this, because we have so many other various challenges that we're faced with at this point in time. So I thank you for illustrating that. And I hope everyone is safe and smart about anything we do in regards to the future.
Thank you, Wayne.
To talk a little bit about insurance specifically, it's so ironic because in the title, it talked about financial and insurance, and we're kind of tied because most, obviously, insurance companies, especially personal lines, are very much tied to investment product and the like. So, and then insurance as a whole is such a broad spectrum, but risk management is something that we're all, regardless of whatever business or line of business we're in, is first and foremost and most important right now for continued success. So that being said, I sat up last night. I'm not as smart as John Howe, so I sat up and I put together a little 7-page PowerPoint, the whole 9 yards. And I'm going to, and Diane, I shared with that. I sent my latest iteration to you this morning. By all means, anybody wants it, please share it with anyone who would request that. But I'm going to put that aside right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about current times, because between last night and today, things have changed in some way, in some respect. So I want to talk a little bit about the challenges, and the challenges in risk management are universal, not just to insurance of any kind. I work for a commercial property insurance company, but also personal lines, also any line of business, telecommunications or banking or anything. Risk management is apropos for, especially at this time, for all lines of business, including mom and pop shops. It doesn't matter. Some of the challenges are universal. Disruption due to social distancing, plummeting employee productivity. Some people are hourly wage workers. They can't work from home. They don't have that luxury. Others, it's just not impossible for them to do that. Stressed supply chains, recession, unemployment, and investment. Economic instability and civil unrest, and also mitigation strategies. And again, I put a lot of information specific to that in my deck, but I want to move on and talk a little bit about, I think Terry and John opened the door to talk about our industry specific, especially to the planners and professionals, meeting professionals that are on the line, because I wear 2 hats. One is past chair of FICP. I plan the annual meeting to be held in November. And also, 2, I have a team of meeting professionals that we manage probably about 130 meetings per annum, and many of which are going to take place in the 4th quarter. And some we already canceled, as you can imagine. So it's a very challenging time for all of us. I want to talk and spend this little bit of time talking about some of the things that the level of expectation that our companies right now have placed upon us to kind of guide them. And what are some of the things that we have to kind of talk to them about in order to get back to the new normal, or as John would say, the new reality, because that's what it is. This is going to be our new reality. It's not something that's going to happen and go away and we're going to be able to move back to the way things were always done. That's just not going to happen. So some of the things that came to mind were, you know, following the government and regulatory guidelines. I mean, that's going to really play a big part in what we can do moving forward for meetings and events, where they're going to be held. It could be state by state, destination by destination. I mean, these are things that are really going to affect not only our planning internally, how to manage these processes and put them in place, but or the hotels or venues. But it's also kind of going to drive exactly what we can and cannot do, where we can and cannot go. The who, what, where, and how. I mean, we do a lot of client meetings, for example. I mean, they have their individual travel policies. They're going to be affected. That will affect whether or not they can even come to the meeting. And if that be the case, is there going to be a hybrid approach? Are we going to have virtual meetings moving forward when we're going to go back to face-to-face? Or they're not going to be able to attend? I mean, that's a driving force as to what's going on. So we have to survey and find out, okay, what can you do if we decide to move forward with the meeting and invite you? Who's coming? Who's coming to our meetings? You know, are they internal meetings? Obviously, they adhere to the travel policy. Again, any government regulations or what have you. Can they travel? Are they able to, you know, state by state? Is that the way it's going to be? Or is it going to be, eventually it's going to be on a federal basis of, you know, what people can and cannot do, where they can and cannot go? I mean, these are all things that we're taking in consideration right now as we begin to try to open up and decide exactly what we can do moving forward. As far as my company is concerned, on June 12th, we determine whether or not we'll move forward with meetings in the fourth quarter, or are we going to transition everything into 2021? Obviously, that's a big step to take because we don't know what's going to happen fourth quarter, or if that be the case, is that going to transition into the first quarter of 2021, when a lot of our meetings are running? And then, of course, all the meetings that are being canceled are now being moved forward into either fourth quarter, 21 or even 22. And so it's a mad rush from a planner perspective. A lot of the companies are moving and pushing everything forward. How is that going to affect us? Is there going to be availability? And then we're not even talking about specs, because the specs are going to really pretty much determine where we're going.
Well, Wayne, can I just interrupt you for a moment there? And John, I want you to think about this one too, because this came up before, and I think more than ever now, is the concept of a cancellation clause over the force majeure clause over now, you know, the improbability. So what, from an insurance point of view and a legal point of view, this is one of the questions is, what do I do? You know, what is the benefits of having these in this time? What do we do legally and from an insurance point of view?
Well, I guess I make a comment. I welcome Wayne's too, because he's right there. What the riots and civil disobedience have done is basically open up a new category in any cancellation insurance policies, disruption or, you know, interruption, business interruption policy, to give you a new one. And this is a lot, in some respects, if your office building has been boycotted out, burned, whatever, if you're a storekeeper and your building is destroyed, you now have a pretty legitimate, easy to prove type of claim. And from the standpoint of a city that is now in a shutdown, where you can't move anywhere from 9 to 6 in the morning, where they're not letting people in and out of the downtown area unless you're an essential visitor or essential business. For example, in Chicago, if I were going to stay at the Hyatt Regency Chicago, number one, I could not get on the L to get downtown because the L is not going into the loop or business area. If I am a person who's coming from Detroit or New York or anywhere, I'm not going to be able to get in the downtown area. I might be able to by saying, well, I'm a guest of the hotel, but what is the reason for you being there? So it's a whole different ballgame that's come into play because of this new element that none of us wanted to see, but it is a different opportunity. And I hate to use the word opportunity, but that's what it is, for being able to file a claim and go forward.
Yes, and Wayne, I mean, from an insurance point of view, you know, there and where do you put that in a contract, and how do you update contracts that you have now? I mean, is that something you can touch on, just for people who are asking that question?
Well, I guess I make a comment. I welcome Wayne's too, because he's right there. What the riots and civil disobedience have done is basically open up a new category in any cancellation insurance policies, disruption or, you know, interruption, business interruption policy, to give you a new one. And this is a lot, in some respects, if your office building has been boycotted out, burned, whatever, if you're a storekeeper and your building is destroyed, you now have a pretty legitimate, easy to prove type of claim. And from the standpoint of a city that is now in a shutdown, where you can't move anywhere from 9 to 6 in the morning, where they're not letting people in and out of the downtown area unless you're an essential visitor or essential business. And then, of course, all the meetings that are being canceled are now being moved forward into either fourth quarter,
Well, and it's ironic because we're going through that right now. Where force majeure is not able to pick up. We have to take a look at some sort of neurovirus clause. But again, a lot of the hotels will tell you, well, Wayne, this can't go on to perpetuity. This is something that we have to put in the context of, well, it's good from here to here, and else we can't honor that because we could potentially put ourselves at risk or risk of cancellation, in basically in theory that this may continue. Look at coronavirus as an example. We can't say what's going to happen 3 months from now any more than we can say what's going to happen, next week. So it's such a fluid situation, and I'm sure, John, you can jump in on that from the legal aspect of it, but it's so fluid that a lot of people are scratching their head about how do we approach this, because it's something that can't rest and reside in every contract for any undistinguished amount of time.
Well, here's another thought, and Wayne is right on. Part of the situation would be that we will put in our contracts that if there is an incident that occurs within 3 months or 2 weeks or whatever of the time for our meeting, we're going to reserve the right to cancel or to postpone or delay or to otherwise renegotiate. Go back to the time of Legionnaire's disease. So the hotel is found to be appropriately able to reopen at the end of Legionnaire's disease, and your meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks after that declaration comes forward. How many of your people want to be the first people in a hotel that has just experienced a Legionnaire's disease? There's the emotional aspect that comes into play. So you want to give yourself a window as to when that's going to be applicable. And by that I mean, you might say if there's a hurricane, well, so let's use Legionnaire, if there's a communicable disease, if there's a riot or there's destruction or civil unrest or anything else that has happened within a period of time before my meeting, let's say 3 months before my meeting or 2 months or 2 weeks, I still reserve the right to cancel without liability or to delay or postpone my program because that occurred within the window that I provided in my contract, allowing me to do that.
How does that relate to insurance, Wayne? And then I'm coming back, John. I have a heated question for you, and then I have one for you, Wayne. But Wayne, what are you thinking with what John just spoke about?
Well, it's pretty much in the same line of we had mentioned. I mean, it's it has to be for basically a defined period of time, and then it's on a case-by-case basis on top of that. I mean, people are looking at this and saying, well, okay, fine, if we agree to this, what liability are we facing? And then we're talking about hotels. Let's talk about hotels specifically. I mean, they're coming back from an extended period of time where there's little, if any, revenue. So, I mean, there's obviously from the revenue managers and the ownership, there's going to be a big push to say, okay, fine, we got to get back up and running in order to get the doors back open and get people employed and get back on the positive side of the balance sheet. So, again, this is not caused by an economic downturn per se, so much so as a pandemic, which is what's causing this. So it's a pretty fluid situation.
It's a fluid situation. John, just a quick answer to this so we don't, since I'm frustrated, just for John, just to clarify, did Jonathan say at this time we cannot determine whether we have responsibility to tell other attendees that someone has the virus? We may not know the names of these individuals. We don't want to start a panic. What do we do?
Well, I don't think you have a responsibility that you yourself, your organization, has to do the contact tracing. And part of that becomes, I think, from the standpoint of what government agencies are saying, or if you have a device, if you're willing to have your Apple, your Google, or whatever it's going to be, because I don't know what the technology is. I yield to fellows on this as to being able to make that. But I don't think you have, if you know that somebody came down with COVID at your program or meeting, you might just put out a factor and say, we've been made aware that somebody did come in contact with this. You don't know who that person necessarily is. You don't want to disclose the name of the person. We just had a case here in Chicago or in Cook County where there was an ordinance that was about to be passed that would require that when you're calling 911, that you would have to disclose to the 911 operator whether anybody at that location had been subject to COVID or whatever. The court said, no, you cannot invade their privacy by doing that. There's no obligation on them to disclose whether or not they're there. But if I'm a building manager, I am probably going to have, if I know of cases in my building, I'm going to let the building know, hey, somebody on the 23rd floor came down with COVID. I will tell you, I mentioned the 23rd floor. That's exactly what happened in my building, where my office is, that one of the tenants on our floor had come down with COVID. The building management notified everybody on the 23rd floor that there had been a reported case, and that was it. I mean, we were made aware of the fact, but we were not made aware of who that person was, since it was with a different person. They said at the time that person had been in the building. So if you had been in the building at the same time that individual was, or shortly thereafter, then it was up to you as to what you were going to do.
Right. Thank you, John. Wayne, I just want to shift a little bit here just for the sake of time to a question. I've heard that damage to properties due to civil unrest is not necessarily covered in general liability policies. Is this typically the case? Also, if you have business interruption insurance, is the loss of business due to riots and pandemic covered under those types of policies? Is that something you can speak on, Wayne?
I can speak a little bit about, and I'm sure, again, we're getting into more legality. John may be more well equipped to deal with that than I would be, but I can tell you this from insurance or business interruption insurance and things of that nature. It really depends on the insurance and the company and the coverage. I mean, there may be some clauses or what have you for certain things, you know, but I think it's on a case-by-case basis from what I've seen in a few companies I've worked for, quite honestly, Diane. It can
basically it really, so basically what I'm hearing is read the fine print, because every contract is different, every insurance company is different with what their coverage is, and we really have to question. You know, and I want to say this to all the planners too, is Larry Cosio, who is with Cosio Insurance, was scheduled to join Wayne today. Larry had a personal accident and he couldn't make it. So, but if you have any specific questions on insurance, I will forward them to him and he will be happy to answer your questions following this event.
The only comment I would make, Diane, is that it's going to depend exactly what Wayne said. Read your policy, not only the small print, but the bold-face print, because the bold-face print is going to tell you what's excluded. And I think in many situations, it'll depend on what the circumstances are, what the policy provides from a business interruption point of view. The one thing, though, I think you're more likely going to find that the policy would cover civil disobedience or a riot or something of that nature than it would be a communicable disease.
Right. And I think in the future, you know, we're certainly going to have more programming on insurance specifically, as things are changing every single day, every week, just to keep up with what we need to know. I just have one comment here. I'm working with a hotel in Florida. If someone has the virus, it is the responsibility of the hotel to reach out to the CDC. They have made that clear to me that they've made it clear to me that it is their responsibility. So there's a lot, I guess, of different discussion going on. And one thing too, Wayne, just to end here, is the concept of COIs. And as a planner, you work with so many vendors and crew and production. A COI obviously says that I have insurance, but we don't know what kind of insurance people have. So we have to be mindful of that as well.
That's very true, Diane, because they're very generalized. And everyone's asking for it now. The hotel's asking us, we're asking the hotels, the sort of third parties, subcontractors. But in honesty, again, you know, there's fine print involved in that. And what is the limit of liability? And there are other things that involve that we really need to be aware of that, especially now.
Especially now, and just because there are a couple of people in the chat room too that are they're just not clear, and I don't know a specific answer. I'm not clear if someone gets sick at my events, am I legally bound to let attendees know and give them the option of leaving?
Well,
Legally bound, John, or just,
no, I mean,
you know?
you may not be legally bound, but you feel from a compassion point of view, you've got to pass it on. I mean, and the other part of the coin is somebody going to come up to you and breathe on you and say, hey, by the way, I've got COVID-19? I don't think so. I think that, again, the practicality, pragmatic aspect of this is if all of a sudden I were to find out that I was positive and had it, I would probably let the sponsor of the meeting know, hey, pass this on for anybody who made contact with me. And I'd probably let them use my name. That would be my social responsibility. But on the other hand, nothing compels me to do that. And I have no responsibility to do that. But I think the moral and the right thing to do, as Martin Luther King said, there's never a wrong time to do the right thing.
Isn't that true? Isn't that true? Everyone, we have, our chat rooms are going to be open for about 5 minutes. We think that it's a time for you to share some thoughts, maybe come back to us with some topics. Any questions or any of your comments that are not covered just for the sake of time with our program will be answered following the event, just so you know, because I know there's a lot on force majeure and how to handle that. And I remember, John, with force majeure, it's a work in progress. Is that the short answer?
Yeah, it's a short answer, and I know Terri wants to make a comment as well.
Yes, Terri.
Yes, the one thing, and I learned this from Jonathan a long time ago, and many of our other hospitality legal minds out there, we have commercially impracticable in our force majeure clause. And there's 2 points I'd like to make. Every time I called a hotel that had a meeting in March, April, May, even into June now, my opening conversation wasn't, here's a letter from my client's legal department, my client wants to cancel. It was empathizing what the position that the hotel is in, the position that the client is in. Can we have a conversation about a date change and doing an addendum to the contract to make that happen? And every single one of my clients was able to do that. But most importantly, the hotels came back to me and said, the legal proof on commercially impracticable is a much lower bar to meet than illegal or impossible. And as sad as it is, if only 90% or 10% of flights are flying, that doesn't make it illegal. You could still get there. So really that phrase, and I'll defer back to Jonathan that he can expand on that, but that was a very important part of our force majeure clause. But even more importantly, being a good partner with the hotels. We're all in this together. How can we work together and keep it on their books, move it forwards?
Right. I think that that's the major message we've all been following. But I'm going to go back just for the sake of time to Wayne. Wayne, do you have like a closing statement before we go into the chat room on insurance, on where you stand with business resiliency, which seems to be the word of the moment?
I would say just make sure you read the fine print, first of all. I think it's very important that everyone knows exactly what's going on. And also take a look at your companies, take a look at what they're doing, take a look at their plans. Everybody has a risk manager. They may call them different things in different companies, but make sure you have those conversations. If you're a meeting professional, know exactly how your company feels about and how they stand on certain issues, because it's going to affect you in some way, shape, or form, especially on the hospitality side. Because we really need to know what we can do internally and what the company's direction is before we can actually go externally and say, okay, fine, we want to place a meeting, we want to do something, and look at the contracts and be realistic. And to Terry's point, really, it's a partnership. Take a look, talk to your hoteliers, talk to your vendors, your third parties. Make sure that everyone's on the same page, because we are really in the same boat here. And I think it's important that we really, especially at this time, as we begin to whatever the new normal will be, or should I say the new reality, let's be very conscious of exactly what that is and how that will affect us in our individual companies.
Right. Well, Wayne, thank you very much, and thank you especially for staying with us today and for mentioning all that we're experiencing right now. I appreciate it.